Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for your patience. We realize there's quite a lot of delay. Welcome at this press conference after the Foreign Affairs Council of today. High Representative Federica Mogherini will present the outcomes of the debate and then we'll take your questions. High Representative, you have the floor.
Thank you, Maya. I apologize, but I warned you in the morning. It would have been a long day, and I kept the promise. So we just finished with the ministers. A very long day of council, very productive, on which the EU member states showed full unity on all the files we've been discussing and deciding upon. I'll try to be very short in my introductory remarks so I can take most of your questions. You will have seen on Syria we adopted this morning Council conclusions, they're very substantial, they're also very long, very detailed, and they cover our common position, our common also indication for action for the coming weeks in relation to the crisis in Syria extensively. So I would refer to these conclusions. Just highlighting that there was an unequivocal and strong wish from all member states to use the Brussels conference next week as the opportunity to relaunch, together with the United Nations, the political process to solve the Syria crisis. We had a very good discussion with the ministers on the Iran nuclear deal, where we reiterated our strong commitment to continuing the full implementation of the agreement in all its parts by all. This entails support for the work that in particular France, Germany and the UK are developing with the United States administration to address some of the concerns that President Trump has expressed within the framework of the existing agreement. And at the same time working to reassure the rest of the international community and obviously also the Iranian authorities on the fact that the European Union not only is committed to the full implementation of the agreement, but also will continue to implement fully the agreement in the future, because we see this as a strategic element of our security and also the security of the region. Obviously, this doesn't mean that other issues that fall beyond the field of competence of the agreement, meaning non-nuclear issues like the situation in Syria that we discussed separately, or the situation in Yemen that we discussed separately, or the human rights issues, for instance, in Iran that we discussed separately, are not addressed. On the contrary, the European Union is probably the most active player when it comes to dialogue with Iran. But also we have a system of sanctions already in place addressing some of these elements. So we will and continue to address these issues, but separately from the JCPOA, that we will continue to preserve 100%. We had a very extensive debate with the ministers on our relation with the Western Balkans, in particular in preparation for the summit we're going to have in Sofia end of May, restating our clear engagement and commitment to the region as a whole, our 6 partners there, and the perspective of the enlargement process. This is not, the enlargement, as you know, is not an issue for the foreign ministers, but still there was a clear indication of support for the strategy that the Commission presented a few months ago, and the continuous work we do with the Western Balkans as an interest of the European Union and of the European Union member states to increase cooperation and to give credibility, strong credibility to the European Union accession path for the region. Last but not least, we addressed 2 other issues, our relations with Russia, on which I will say a bit more, because I covered this a bit less this morning coming into the Council, promising you that I would have been more going more into details afterwards, and a short point on the future external financing instruments, on which we had the first exchange with the ministers on the MFF, proposal will come to the table in the coming weeks from the Commission side, but let me say that there was a clear indication from the ministers that all activities we do at the European Union level on the external action will need to have adequate financing in the future framework, because obviously the level of activities has increased enormously, covering from migration to counter-terrorism and multiple humanitarian crises and crisis management. So obviously we will need to have adequate resources to meet our needs and ambitions. On Russia, let me say that we shared with the foreign ministers a common assessment of the challenges faced in EU's relations with Russia. We have seen an evolving pattern of challenging Russian behaviour in many different fields. Central to these challenges is, of course, still the situation in Ukraine, with the illegal annexation of the Crimean Peninsula and destabilization of eastern Ukraine that continue to this day. Other areas of challenging Russian behaviour include, obviously, the Russian posture in Syria that we discussed in the morning, activities of disinformation, internal interference, hybrid threats, malicious cyber activities, and inside Russia, a shrinking space for independent political voices, civil society, but also a decrease of respect for human rights and the rule of law. In our discussion today with the Member States, we reaffirmed clearly that the 5 principles we defined together 2 years ago remain absolutely valid for our relations with Russia. And we have seen what we can do differently or more under each of these 5 principles, maintaining the overall importance of all of them as a balanced approach. First of them, that the full implementation of the Minsk agreements remains a key element for any substantial change in EU-Russia relations. We will continue to support the work of the Normandy format. We have looked at ways in which the European Union as such can help more, in particular Germany and France, to work for the full implementation of the Minsk agreements, in particular, obviously on the political level, but also with concrete steps on the humanitarian field, on demining, on the preparation for reconstruction on Donbass, and obviously keeping strong coordination also within the UN framework. Second, we will continue to strengthen relations with our Eastern partners and other neighbours, especially after the very successful Eastern Partnership Summit we had, but also the Central Asia strategy that is coming up. Keeping a policy of transparency towards Russia on our cooperation with our Eastern partners, and exploring cooperation in areas of mutual interest. I've always made it very clear, publicly, but also in our meetings with our Russian interlocutors. Our friendship and partnership with our Eastern partners is never against anyone, is always cooperative, and we never think in a logic of sphere of influence. Third, it has been painfully evident with the Salisbury attack. We need to reinforce our own resilience inside the European Union. We have discussed today how the European Union, together with Member States, can take forward the European Council decision to strengthen resilience to chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear-related risks, as well as to increase capabilities to address hybrid threats, including in the areas of cyber, strategic communication and counterintelligence. And here, obviously, Member States have a critical role to play, feeding into the work that the European Union institutions will do. We'll come back on this point in view of the European Council in June. Fourth and fifth are principles related to engagement. You know that we have started a policy of selective engagement with the Russian Federation in areas where we see a European Union interest to do so, and Member States agreed that this is still a very much valid principle. We need to continue to apply, mainly in the areas of foreign and security policy, I mentioned the JCPOA, so the nuclear deal with Iran. I could mention the Middle East peace process and the work we do in the Quartet. I could mention Afghanistan or the DPRK, or global issues like climate change, environment, migration, counterterrorism, or cooperation in the Arctic, which is strategically important for Europeans. Last but not least at all, I would say actually even first, and all ministers stress this point as a key issue, increasing our support for Russian citizens, civil society, human rights defenders, people-to-people contact, especially a focus on the youth of Russia Federation. I don't have the exact numbers, but I can share with you that the fact that the Russian students and researchers are among the first, if not the first, of third countries benefiting from the Erasmus Plus program is something we want to increase to make sure that links between our people are not only maintained but also increased. So there will be a clear increase of our work and also hopefully of our funding on our work on people-to-people contact, especially with an eye to the younger generation. I'll stop here. Sorry, I said it, I would have been brief and I wasn't, but still I would take most of your questions.
Thank you very much. As usually, please introduce yourself and the media you're working for, and I'll start with Nureddin.